Dr. James Goodbrand sterilized many of our women. In 1952, when he heard I was going to marry a traditional chief, Goodbrand kept saying to me, "If you marry Freddie, I'll have to do an operation on you." That scared me, and I tried to see another doctor, but the Indian agent wouldn't let me. So when I gave birth to my daughter, it was Goodbrand who delivered her. After the birth, I hurt really bad and I kept bleeding. Then I learned that my tubes had been tied. He must have done it to me after the delivery when I was still unconscious. I heard Goodbrand say he was getting paid $300 by the government for every Indian woman he sterilized.
Were there any white people that gave testimony as to this happening?
There was a couple of staff members from the Alberta school who gave testimony, Caucasian staff members, and they confirmed everything and more than what the people were saying.
So what was the results? What did the tribunal do?
Well, the result of the tribunal was they sent a report to the United Nations to Mary Robinson was High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva at the UN office there, and they sent a report to her. I sent 14 hours of videotape plus all of the documentation and affidavits and everything to her office. We never heard a thing, never got back to us. And a couple of years later, I learned that it was because of pressure that Canada brought to bear at the UN to keep this issue under the wraps, basically.
How could Canada do that? You mean Canada can influence the United Nations?
Well, it has a lot of pull. For example, at the time, the General Secretary's assistant was a woman, Denise Frechette, who was a career civil servant from the Department of National Defense in Ottawa, and she was the one at the UN setting the agenda of all these different divisions and committees at the UN. So it would have been easy for her and others to keep this off the agenda.
As an arm of the Canadian government, the United Church of Canada has led this attack against Kevin Annett and his work, with the active support of covert operatives of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Cooperation between the RCMP and United Church in this silencing campaign against Kevin Annett began as early as June 4, 1996, when church official John Siebert wrote to Sergeant Paul Wilms of the RCMP's E Division in Vancouver to share confidential information about Kevin, after he had spoken out in the media about the deaths of children in United Church Indian residential schools. That same month, Sergeant Wilms used this information to confront and threaten Kevin if he did not stop making public allegations of murders in residential schools. When Kevin refused to stop investigating residential school crimes, this joint harassment campaign against him by the United Church and the RCMP intensified. Between 1997 and 1998, church officials sabotaged Kevin's doctoral program of studies at the University of British Columbia by blocking funding for him, which forced Kevin to withdraw from the program. One of Kevin's professors admits having been spoken to by RCMP officers about what they called the dangerous nature of Kevin's research into United Church residential schools. Yet by far the most serious attacks on Kevin Annett and his supporters came in the wake of the historic tribunal into residential schools that Kevin organized in June of 1998 in Vancouver. His success in bringing United Nations observers to this event to hear residential school survivors' testimonies caused the government to directly subvert and destroy Kevin's work.
Naturally, it was sabotaged. And when you get big enough, it's kind of like being a germ in a system. You get big enough and the antibodies attack you, and that's what happened. It was clear from the tribunal that a lot of crimes that had never been heard about were finally out there publicly. People talked about sterilizations for the first time, the medical experiments that they were doing on kids at the Catholic and United Church hospitals and the residential schools on the West Coast. That was all talked about. We sent it off to the United Nations, and in retaliation, a lot of shit came down on the people who did it. I mean, Harry Nahani, who was the person who identified that the little girl had been killed, murdered at the residential school, United Church, when she was a witness to it. The RCMP broke into her house without a warrant 2 weeks after the tribunal. The RCMP tactical squad and ransacked the house at gunpoint, held everybody at gunpoint and just ransacked the house. People were threatened. They were thrown out of their jobs on the reserve after they'd given testimonies. I started getting followed around by these two guys who physically attacked me on 2 occasions. This was all within a month or two of the tribunal, so the heat began to come down. And I knew it is because things that were shared at the tribunal weren't just about the past. They were about pedophile rings that were being operated today with the help of native politicians and church lawyers. It was about crimes of the present that were begun in the past but carried on today in the Aboriginal world. It all began to... The veil began to lift for me. I realized I've got a real tiger by the tail here. It isn't just about something that happened years ago. Because if it was, why would the harassment continue? I mean, the stuff in the past has been resolved. They've bought off the witnesses. They've paid off people with court settlements.
So why did they continue then?
They continued the harassment because this is about stuff today. This is about how Native people are still being exploited, how Native children are still being used, how land is still being stolen by multinational corporations, and how the Native politicians are important to this whole thing. And so they don't want the truth of the residential schools brought up because they themselves are implicated in these crimes. When they were kids, they were the enforcers. They were the ones who helped abuse and control their fellow students. So they don't want that coming out. And I began to learn that after the tribunal. And like I say, the proof was in the pudding. We were shut down. The results of the tribunal were never acted on by the UN. The media imposed a blackout on the whole issue. I was completely isolated. In the year after the tribunal, it felt like a wall was falling down around me.
Was it?
Yes, these cage doors were just closing on me. Bang, bang, bang. The media wouldn't talk to me anymore. My letters weren't printed. People stopped talking to me. The Native chiefs wouldn't have anything to do with me. It was just absolute shutdown on every front.
So why did you continue?
Well, I didn't really want to at first. It felt like this is pointless. I'm up against the state. I'm up against, the church, multinationals, their Native accomplices. I mean, who the hell is going to support me? The Natives don't want to because they're too scared for their life. The whites don't want to because they see me as a traitor. So I didn't feel I could proceed. But there was something, my mind was telling me that, but there was something inside me that was very stubborn and said, you have to keep going.
In the years following the Residential Schools Tribunal, Kevin Annett persisted in his efforts to document and make public the evidence of mass murder and ethnic cleansing in Canada. Abandoned, penniless, and attacked from all sides, Kevin nevertheless continued to speak out publicly on the hidden history of mass murder in Canada, and kept on documenting all that he had been told and had discovered about crimes against Native people. But Kevin's crowning achievement came in early 2001, when he finally published the accumulated testimonies and documents about atrocities in Canadian Indian residential schools, in a book entitled Hidden from History, The Canadian Holocaust. A dozen separate publishers refused to produce the book, so Kevin printed it himself and circulated more than 1,000 copies to libraries, governments, human rights groups, and Aboriginal people around the world. But most of the books ended up in the hands of the people for whom Kevin had labored so long, the residential school survivors themselves. In the fall of 2005, Kevin completed the much expanded second edition of Hidden from History, and for the first time asked the deeper question of why legal genocide had happened in his country, what had given rise to this plague in the first place, and why is it continuing?
Kevin, you've remarked to me that the tides are changing, that things slowly are becoming made known. Yes, they are. It is very slow. Remember, it was 10 years ago that hearing took place. But I do believe that the changes that have come about are because of the price you have paid. A terrible price of what you have paid.
Let's fire Kevin Annett. If he doesn't have a job, he doesn't do the work he does in the community. And that's exactly what happened. And as anyone knows who was involved at that time, we tried desperately to convince the United Church not to fire Kevin Annett because he was doing a lot of good work. But of course our pleas fell on deaf ears because those people didn't live in the community, they didn't witness the good work Kevin did, and the end result is their legacy of corruption continues.
Church officials have repeatedly silenced journalists and prevented publications from reporting the facts of both crimes in Indian residential schools and Kevin Annett's expulsion from the church. In January of 1999, the globally acclaimed magazine The New Internationalist ran a brief article on Kevin Annett and genocide in Canada. In response, National United Church official David Iverson circulated a 14-page character assassination of Kevin Annett to the world media, and threatened The New Internationalist with a boycott of their magazine unless it stopped all reporting of residential school crimes and Kevin Annett. New Internationalist editors buckled to this pressure and never again reported Kevin Annett's work. In March of 1999, the national magazine Canadian Dimension was similarly silenced after it ran an article by Kevin Annett on the Ahousaht land deal between the United Church and Macmillan Bloedel. United Church lawyers threatened Canadian Dimension with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit unless it publicly retracted the article, which it did.